I work at a psychiatric hospital for the elderly. The days aren't glamorous, and more often than not, we have difficulty keeping certain patients under control, whether it be dementia, PTSD, or Alzheimer's. Some of the older folks require constant observation. This makes it incredibly hard to find the time to spare to give to the calmer and gentler patients. And I know it's not much, but I try my hardest to make the day-to-day life for the patients as well off as I can. Though after some time, I did realize I was falling victim to the rut of prioritizing certain patients over others. It wasn't out of favoritism. I just wanted to prevent a hostile space for everyone. My job as an assistant at this hospital is to gather information on possible solutions to patients' issues. I don't diagnose anyone, nor do I recommend medications. I'm more of a physical helper. I'll answer questions like, what do they need? And would they be happier with a view? There was one patient in particular that none of us had really spent much time with. His name was Oliver Clark. I couldn't have told you one detail about the man other than that he seemed quiet. He never said much, and when he did talk, it was always very pleasant. His old drawl carried with it the weight of both experience and maturity. It helped that he had a slight southern accent, but from where I couldn't say. One day I decided that the regulars around here could afford to lose my attention for a little while. The other assistants could pull the slack for me. I was going to give Oliver my undivided attention. The day I spoke to him, he was sitting in the lounge area. He had claimed a sofa facing the window as his own, and day after day he'd spend his time watching the sun rise and set. This seemed to put his mind at ease for one reason or another. I walked up behind him, folding chair in hand, and a smile on my face. "Hello, Mr. Clark. I couldn't help but notice you've been sitting alone all day. Would you mind if I sat with you for a bit?" Oliver continued to stare off in the distance, the sun a few hours away from setting, yet still giving off that warm glow of a late afternoon sky. After a few seconds, Oliver grunted softly, clearing his throat. "Not at all, kid." His voice crackled as dust seemingly cleared from his throat. His face didn't shift nor change from his indifferent expression. I couldn't decide if he wanted my company or was just too polite to tell me off. Either way, I took advantage of it. I pulled my chair out next to his and faced the slowly falling sun next to him. The orange warm glow of the rays filled me with a certain kind of relaxation. The background noise of the hospital behind me faded away, and soon enough it felt like me and this old man were the only ones around. "So," the old man spoke up, "what brings you over to my parts?" A small smile crept onto his weathered face, his lips upturned just barely enough for me to notice. I let out a quiet sigh of relief. He seemed unlike the other patients here. "I just thought I'd take some time to meet up with the mystery man no one knows a thing about." Mr. Clark gave a small chuckle. "Is that what I am? A mystery man?" I saw his brow furrow slightly as he began to think about those words. "I suppose that's what I am now, huh?" he asked in a quiet haze. "You don't have to be if you don't want to," I remarked, my eyes scanning his face for any sign of discomfort. "Tell you what, spend a few moments with me and I might tell you something." His eyes shifted, dead set on the shimmering summer's grass in front of us. "Being alone all day isn't all it's cracked up to be at my age. Just never felt like I should be anyone's burden. I ain't worth it." I felt guilty with those words. He was always such a calm man. We never gave a second thought about leaving him to his own devices. I let my eyes wander back towards the window, with a tingle of shame crawling across my spine, and nodded. "I'll be right here if you want to talk," I said softly. It was all I could offer. It was only after an hour or so that he began to speak again, his rusty vocal cords being plucked once more. "You know, I used to own a business. I'd hire kids like you all the time. The good ones, I mean." "Really? What did your business do?" His eyes seemed to shimmer with memories, his smile slowly returning. "Oh, it wasn't much, just a small construction company. We'd pave driveways, replace shingles, put up small sheds. Really, we did whatever the town needed. It was a small community, easier to gain a decent reputation." "Were you close with a lot of people from your hometown?" I asked, not expecting much, since no one had ever visited old Mr. Clark. I let Mr. Clark trail off, reascending into his memories of better times. I never knew Mr. Clark had a family. To be honest, I knew pretty much nothing about him. As an assistant patient, files were off limits. If we wanted to find out more about someone, they'd have to tell us. "It sounds like you had a good family," I replied softly. "More than I deserved, at least." The wrinkles on his face deepened like valleys, the glow of the sun casting shadows across his face. "Don't say that, Mr. Clark. I might not know you the best, but you're always the most pleasant one here." I gave a gentle laugh. "You know, my kids used to be into the whole fortune teller thing. I was never sure where they learned it from, but every now and then they'd make me do something weird to guess our future." Clark gave a short chuckle. "One day I walked in on them holding each other's hands, tracing the lines on them. I remember asking, 'What y'all doing?' And them looking up at me with those bright eyes, all excited." Clark's gaze stretched past the skin on his hands and reached deeper. He was pulling a memory straight out of his mental reserves. "We're reading our palms, Daddy," my little girl said. She grabbed me and pulled me down to my knees. "Look, Daddy, look at this line. I'm going to be rich," she said. My boy, not to be outdone, whips out his hand and points to another line and says, "Look, Daddy, I'm going live forever." My little girl lets out a huff and says to him, "Big deal." I laughed, not much else I could have done. I had no idea what they were talking about. The old man smiled as he stared at his hands, his children's voices ringing in his memories like they were freshly spoken. But needless to say, my kids grab my hand and start saying all sorts of stuff. "Daddy, you're going to be rich in a few years. Daddy, you must really love Mama. Daddy." He stopped and let out a sniffle, his voice cracking over the emotional strain of this memory. "Daddy, it says you're gonna die soon. Please don't die." He took another long pause. I saw the tears in their faces. They fully believed I was gonna die soon. I had no choice. I grabbed them both up by my arms and I told them I ain't dying anytime soon. A tear rolled down the weathered cheek of this old man, following the trails that age had left behind. Turns out my kids weren't too good at that psychic junk, but whether it be luck or irony, they got my palm right. I stared at this poor old man. He'd been hanging on to this story for so long. The more words that flowed from his mouth, the more age he put on. This story might have been the only thing keeping him going. "Mr. Clark, if you don't want to talk about this, it ain't about what I want. It's what I need. I need to get through this if I ever want to die. I swear the more miserable you are, the longer you live." He gave a bitter half smile, a grimace hiding just a twitch away. I'm going to tell you what got me in here, and you are gonna believe me whether you like it or not." His inflection was clear. I was to sit there and listen. Now, a few weeks after that, I woke up, went to the kitchen, kissed my wife, and grabbed a cup of coffee. My wife looked at me and said, "Hun, the kids are coming home from their friend's house, and they all wanted to swim. You think you could clean out the pool?" Now we hadn't used the pool in some time, so it was due for some cleaning. Mr. Clark began to pantomime his actions, his hands moving with every word he spoke. I finished up my coffee, put the mug in the sink, and walked out to the backyard. There the pool was, all covered up by tarp. I walked over to it and ripped it right over. You know what I saw? I shook my head and the old man continued. "I saw fish in my pool. Weird-looking ones too, all colorful yet slimy-looking. I couldn't believe my eyes. Ain't no way that fish could be swimming in a chlorinated pool, yet there they were." Clark leaned forward and looked at the floor at his feet, as if he could still see the pool in front of him. I scooted up close to the edge and squinted through the muck at the bottom of the pool and saw an opening, like a little crevice leading right off into the ground. About a week or two prior, I remembered feeling a bit of a tremor late at night. I figured a sinkhole must have opened up to an underground stream of something. Not just that, but the sinkhole must have flooded from someplace deeper in the ground and pushed the fresh water up. Now you'd think I'd be upset, right? And maybe I would have been if it wasn't for those fish swimming around. They didn't look like any freshwater fish I'd ever seen. They were much too colorful. I guess you could say I had curiosity guiding me when I contacted the wildlife service downtown and had them come up for a look. "What's the matter?" the ranger asked as I took him into our backyard. I told him you'd just have to see for yourself. That expression on his face when he saw them damned fish in the swimming pool was nearly priceless. That ranger was at a loss for words. Hell, he even pulled out a little handbook from his truck of the different local fish species and flipped through it like his life depended on it. He came up with nothing. Not one fish in that strange cluster swimming around matched any known fish in the area. Pretty soon it was big news. Everyone was excited for Oliver's little fishbowl. I started to get offers from marine biologists wanting to do some research on everything from the water composition to documenting the new breeds of fish. When they came over and looked at the pool, they offered me a great deal of money to allow them to break the rest of the concrete tiling of my pool and see what was beneath. Well, I'm a sane man, so I took the offer and let them get to work. What they found was beyond words. That sinkhole was far larger than what it looked like from up top. The thing was a cavern and only got larger the further down it went. Those researchers were at a loss for words. They said the walls didn't look right for a normal sinkhole. They said it was almost like something burrowed upward. That only led them to be more curious. Now they were throwing money at me to let them tear up my backyard enough for them to get some extra equipment going. Once again I took the money, though this time I asked for something extra. If they were going down there, I was going with. After some weeks passed, my backyard began to look like an excavation site. Hell, there were people in scuba gear diving in and out documenting everything. One day this researcher I grew to know, Rory, came up to me and said he had something to show me. He takes me over to my backyard, and there's something sitting in the water, about 20 feet long and metal. Rory tells me he managed to get permission from his company to drive out a small ComSub research submarine. He said he'd be able to squeeze it down until we hit the wider end of the hole. He said we'd be able to make it about 600 feet down and look around before having to pop back up. It had an 8-hour driving life. The kicker was it was a 2-man sub, and per our agreement the only person he could legally take with him was me. I remember being giddy as giddy could be. They were ready for the trip right then, so I ran inside, told my wife and kids, gave them a big old hug and headed back out. It took a while for me to get geared up and to give me a quick rundown on how the sub operates. I laughed and told them I couldn't believe a submarine was in my backyard. Even when I stepped inside it, it hardly felt real. There was my house, still in view from the sub's windows, and there I was, sitting next to a researcher in a goddamn submarine. At first things went as expected. We slowly descended into the pit. Up here they already extensively surveyed what they could have. The fish were all cataloged and examined, and so was the soil and water. Though I'll admit, seeing things through the windows of a 2-man submarine added a new depth to everything. It felt more like a dream. As we crept deeper into the darkness, we began to see more schools of those jelly-coated fish. There were dozens of brightly colored fish, all colored in the oddest way. It was almost like a thick layer of clear mucus was over them, as if they were decomposing or dead in the water yet still gliding around. They were surreal. The researchers, to my knowledge, never did figure out how they had such vivid color from such a sunless area like that pit. Now the walls of the caverns matched the oddness of the fish. The rocks and dirt didn't seem freshly disturbed. It almost seemed like they were made from years upon years of digging. I could swear that we could see long scratches going down the walls like a million feverish hands tearing towards some sort of exit. The deeper we got, the more of those claw marks we saw. "Something's wrong," I remember Rory saying. He wasn't worried, just confused. I asked him, "What's going on?" and he told me the pressure isn't right. It's hardly registering any higher than the surface. I didn't have an answer for him, so I stayed quiet, just staring out the windows at the ever-expanding caverns around us. Pretty soon we began to see fish we've never seen before. They made their homes in, as best as I can say, coralized stalactites. These little guys were hiding in holes in both the stalactites and cave walls. Some larger, some smaller, but all of them stayed far away from us. Rory was awestruck. I looked over at him with a big old smile on my face and saw that look of pure, childish joy captured on his face. We spent a good couple of hours driving the ship to the sides of walls and peering inside the holes at whatever kind of strange vegetation or fish was hiding away. Rory told me that whatever had made those holes in the walls wasn't just a natural occurrence, that it had to have been some sort of large burrowing fish or crustacean never before catalogued. We tried to peer further into these holes, but a thick white moss seemed to be all over the place down there, long as weeds. And there were these strange lily pad-like fish hovering over them. They were like some sort of flat jellyfish with only a single tendril stretching downwards, some several feet long while others only inches. It was a magical sight, them floating around like strange underwater balloons. It was when we started getting past this section of the pit that we started hearing something. It was like a low rumble, 2 quick pulses, then silence. It was quiet at first. Rory was the first to notice it, and he pointed it out to me. He said we still had a bit of depth, and that we could descend safely. He said he wanted to check it out. I didn't know at that time, but he was already pushing this small sub more than it was meant to be pushed. So being uneducated with how it all worked, I nodded at him. I wish I got a good look at his eyes before I agreed to descend one more goddamned foot with him. Rory began our second climb downwards. I watched the holes in the caverns as we passed. The further down we traveled, the less life we saw in them, but the louder the thumping got. I started to feel uneasy. I felt like my head was tilting ever so slightly. It was a bad case of vertigo. I turned to Rory to tell him to stop, but he paid me no mind. His face was pressed against the glass and his mouth was slacked open. He didn't look too well. I started yelling at him, "Rory, Rory, stop," but I couldn't get through. I reached over to his steering rod and tried pulling it up. Rory slammed it back down with such a force that it frightened me. He turned his gaze to me, and I can't say what I saw in his eyes, but if you would have told me the devil was looking at me, I wouldn't have doubted you for a second. He wasn't the same man I traveled down with. His eyes shone like the sun off of a lake and vibrated with each now thunderous thud of whatever lay below us in the depths. At some point, that childish expression gave way to something visceral, and I never noticed. At first, I jolted back, but then felt myself get angry. I'm not an angry man. Hell, at that time in my life, I used to pray for God to give me some backbone to deal with some of the idiots around town. But something came out of me down there. Like Rory went crazy, I too lost a bit of my mind. I balled up my fist and punched the devil right out of Rory. His head hit a metal bar and he slouched right down in his seat. It was at that moment I knew I was fucked. I was fucked. And I was angry, not a good combination. I ended up grabbing the wheel Rory was slumped over and yanked it up. I heard a thud against the ceiling. I thought it was a fish, so I pulled up again. Another thud, but this time it was followed by the grinding of metal of the roof, like a dozen nails scratching a chalkboard. I tried rotating us around, and that's when I caught sight of them. Above us and around us they were people, naked, floating, hair softly gliding with the current. Their skin was pale and blue and their eyes were so cold. They looked at me sitting in my chair with these expressionless gazes like wooden puppets. They weren't moving though, not yet, not until I got up the courage to try once more to ascend. As soon as I did, their dead faces contorted into a rage I can't even begin to describe. Maybe even the rage I had just moment earlier. I looked around me, and there was more of them clambering out of the holes in the walls around us. A seemingly infinite number of clammy bodies tore themselves from those holes and began descending, piling on top of our little metal sanctuary and pulling us downwards. Another low rumble came from the depths as I felt the earth around us begin to shake. Something large was twisting and turning below us. Piles of dirt and rocks began to fall from the walls. A woman who was dangling from the small wing of our sub had a rock spiral into her head. Her expression didn't change as the large stone indented half her skull like a ball of wet paper. I remember thinking that, this is it. This is how I die. A chortle from some unknown beast spouted off from below as a large gust of steaming bubbles blew upwards and against our sub, propelling us slightly upwards enough to be loose from the lifeless hands of the living dead surrounding us. A final time, I pressed the wheel upward and sped off, hitting the sides of walls and caverns as I went. I wasn't adjusted to the steering, I just knew up was good. From there, we kept rising, quickly, the cavern crumbling around us. Large, uneven portions of the walls came toppling down, nearly ripping the metal from our ship. I don't know how we managed to get to the surface, but we did. As soon as our sub breached the surface, I opened the hatch to call out for help, only to see water spouts erupting from the ground around us as the pressure from the deep made its way upward. The research teams had all sprinted off, not one staying to help us. I grabbed Rory and was half out of the submarine before I felt a tug from under us. I felt like I was standing on a fishing bob and something was tugging at us, something strong. I managed to throw Rory over the edge onto some stable ground, but the ship gave out from under me before I could abandon ship. I got sucked back in. I barely had the time to close the hatch before dirt, mud, and water pooled over me. That ship had an 8-hour drive time and a 72-hour pool of emergency air. I used 53 hours of that air before I was dug out. I had to endure the sounds of that damned thumping rising and getting closer to the surface. The waves were moving the sub through the muck like a wave pool, covering me in more and more earth. I spent 53 hours in darkness thinking that I was going to die, about how my body would exhaust its oxygen and I'd float down like all those unfortunate souls before me. It was when the sunlight hit my face that I felt my last moment of happiness. A rescue team had dug me out. They righted the submarine and peeled back the hatch. My mind was a mess. It was reeling from dehydration and exhaustion. As the rescue team lay me down on some solid ground, I looked around. The whole area looked like one giant mud pit. Not one tree nor hill survived whatever was spinning up the ground below. Nor did a one thing that had kept me going. My home. I didn't believe them at first. I just kept shouting, "Where are my kids? Where is my wife?" And my rescuers just kept telling me to calm down. Eventually, they got fed up with my yelling and told me what happened. They got trapped upstairs when the house went under. The ground flipped right from under them. The earth broke right through the foundation, the pipes, hell, even the sewage line. The ground had swallowed my family, and there I was, alone and alive. All the money in the world, and not a thing worth owning that I hadn't lost. I spent the next few years sulking away, trying to buy out a contractor team to dig up that marshland and look for my home, for the bodies of my family. None wanted my money. They told me it'd be impossible for them to dig. That's when the nightmares started coming. I watch as my family sinks into the pit, skin blue and pale, eyes crying out for help as their bodies descended in some sort of sick, majestic way straight into the maw of whatever thing was down there. You see, my biggest fear of dying isn't that I'll be dead. No, it's that I'll go up to the great beyond to find out my family is trapped somewhere else underground, like all those other poor, unfortunate souls. I was quiet for a while. Mr. Clark expended all his energy, and the sun had finally set. He wiped away the tears from his eyes and said one last thing to me. I spend my days in front of this window to feel the sun against my skin, to pretend that I just got out of that hole and that something would be different this time, that my family would be there safe and sound. It's only when the sun sets that realization also sets in. The realization that here I am, decades later, alone. Mr. Clark took a long pause as he stared off into the darkness of the window. He seemed to have a new demeanor to him, whether for the better or worse, I'll never know. Thanks for your company. I didn't know how badly I needed it. I think it's time for me to head off, though. Good night, kid. With that, he brought himself up to his feet, his aged body standing tall against all odds. He walked towards his room with a strength that I had never seen in him before. I continued to sit in that chair for hours afterwards. It was only at the end of my shift did someone disturb me from my stupor. I went home and dreamt of the same nightmare old Mr. Clark had. I could see his family descending into that sunless hole, and there was nothing I could do. When I returned to work the next day, I had found out that Mr. Clark had passed away that night. The mortician made a passing remark to the doctor that I happened to overhear. The mortician mentioned how wet and clammy the body was for no other signs of death. It was after that I spent all the time I could to verify his story. The only thing I couldn't verify was his own personal experiences in the pit. Yet that reoccurring nightmare of mine that has since grown to include one more body falling to the depths is all I need to believe him. To Mr. Oliver Clark, I sincerely hope you're with your family in a better place now. Your story will always live on, one way or another.